Hello? Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's session at the BLID Strategic Forum 2018, which is bridging the divide. In today's session here is bridging the trust divide between people and institutions. Apologies for starting it late. We had some technical issues, as you could have imagined, and in the meantime, we also waited for others to finish their lunch and yeah, come and join us. I would also like to mention that the kind participants, if you would like to move to the first rows on the left, that will be even better, so that it creates some space for others when they come in and join us later. They have that space available. So if you would like, thank you. My name is Ahmed Malaji, and I'm a member of the Global Diplomacy Lab. And I'll be your moderator for the first part of the session today. And later we have planned a very interactive panel discussion with you all. And that part of the session will be moderated by a fellow member of Global Diplomacy Lab, Hanina Benbernu. How are you doing, Hanina, today? Great, wonderful. Okay, and this session in the BLID Strategic Forum 2018 has been brought to you by Global Diplomacy Lab. And to know more about this unique platform, I invite you all to watch this short video.
We share this world. So the idea behind this entire GDL and concept is that the problems are common and we need to find common solutions.
There's no silly ideas, there's no silly questions, there's no ranks, just any idea is good and just throw it out.
If you want to travel fast, you travel alone. But if you want to travel far, you have to travel together.
There's lots of things we can do that diplomats haven't worked on. One is stopping hate speech, using social media to promote peace.
Our lesson in diplomacy is that intervention is in the end also about sustainability. Can you sustain it?
I believe this kind of approach is the one in which people can work together to have solutions and implement them together.
It is legitimate for everybody to go for a better life.
What are we waiting for?
Time matters.
Co-creation.
Communication.
Political will.
Stability.
Possibility.
Purpose.
Technology.
Wonderful. A round of applause for Global Diplomacy Lab and the work that they are doing, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. So now, before getting started, I would like to have a sense of who is in the room. So please raise your hands and let us know, like, who works in the public sector. Okay, wonderful. Who used to work in the public sector? Great. Okay. And who works in the private sector? Okay. Who works in military? We have a military gentleman here. Wonderful, yeah, it seems. And who works in think tank, media, and academic other institutions? Okay, wonderful, yeah. So we have a pretty mix of audience in this room, which is ideal for our discussion today, because later our panelists, our respected panelists, will touch upon different areas and different issues related to trust and trust divide. Okay, so now connecting us to our next part of the session, I'd like to share with you some statistics, but before that, I have a question for you all, and I'd like you to guess the answer. And the answer is really easy. So what is the most important 5-letter word in a relationship?
Money.
Sorry. Well, it could be, but like imagine you would not be in a good situation when you say that, yeah? So money, okay, interesting, yeah, money. Well, I like that too, yeah. But they say money can build or buy you a house, but not a home. And when there's no home and no sense of belonging, there's no relationship there. So can we guess another word? Trust, ladies and gentlemen, wonderful. So where can I trust the technology? Yes, here it is. Okay, next slide. Trust, ladies and gentlemen, wonderful. So it says it takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. Trust is a fundamental element of our everyday life, ladies and gentlemen. If we think it in a personal perspective, let's, for example, suppose if two partners have problems, trust issues with each other, they simply break up. If you have trust issues with your bank, with your financial institution, you simply change it to another financial institution. But what if you have trust issues with institutions? So that's where it becomes challenging. So now I would like to quickly go through some statistics from the Edelman TRUST BAROMETer. I didn't want to share statistics from OECD because we have the Director General here and he would do that. Okay, so I would just, and I won't go into details, so I'll just quickly go over it. So the average trust in institutions between informed and public and versus mass population. Say the mass population distrusts the institutions in 20 out of 28 countries. Okay, next slide. Okay, the average trust in institutions, very interesting, ladies and gentlemen, informed public in 2017 versus comparing it to 2018. So you see like the differences here, and they decline to neutral, from a trust to neutral. Next slide. Okay, trust in government. Well, it increases in 16 of 26 countries, which is quite positive, but still it's 50%, just over 50% of the countries, total countries, that it has been under studies. Next slide, please. Wow. Now look at the title for this slide. A world of distrust. Really? So what is it? Like the average institutions, trust in institutions in general public has been also declining and decreasing each year. Next slide. Okay, and the last slide says talk with me and not talk at. It was an analysis of who to believe and which is more believable. So they say 50% of public, they believe spontaneous speakers rather than rehearsed speakers. Well, I did rehearse and I wanted to be also spontaneous with you all today. So 54% believe in blunt and outspoken versus being diplomatic and polite. 51% believe in personal experiences rather than sharing data in the statistics. 62% of companies believe in social media rather than in advertising. Okay, so this leads me to the last part of my moderation. Some members of the Global Diplomacy Lab, including Mr. Pollins, a very well-known German politician, and the current Dean of Global Diplomacy Lab, they have contributed a video, and they have shared their perceptions on the issue of trust divide and the challenges that exist. So I would invite all of you to watch this short video.
I think it's very important for institutions to have the trust of the people. And I believe one of the fractures that we see in society today is because people are misinformed. There's a lot of news out there that, we don't know if it's validated or not.
Without trust, we cannot live together. And if you look how trust is built up in private relationships, it is a step-by-step thing.
I think there is a huge trust divide between people and institutions at the moment, which is a critical driver of everything from conflict to political instability, and it's really at the heart of all of the challenges that citizens face everywhere.
But I think the reason in Africa and many parts of the South is not the same as in the North, particularly because there's a historical significance in that many of the institutions weren't actually created by the people who they're servicing today. And when you look at what happened after independence, a lot of these institutions did not refresh themselves. They continued with that same process.
Distrust emerges when democratic structures are captured by those whose main agenda is keeping themselves in power. One result of this process is biased national funding, which will negatively affect NGOs and academics.
We have to find ways to make people in power more responsible and more accountable, because unless we can do that, we're not going to be able to deal with all of the other problems that we collectively face or achieve any of the SDGs.
A good synergy between the citizens and institutions.
In my view, transparency, predictability, this is what builds trust and where we have to work on.
We need more advocacy, we need more information, we need more training, education. We need people to be better informed, and I think that would definitely help with trust. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now I hand over the floor to Hanina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. So my name is Hanina Benbenou. I'm also a member of the Global Diplomacy Lab, and I'd like to invite our panelists to join me on the panel. So I'll start with Marcos Bonturi. He is the Director for Public Governance at the OECD in Paris. I also would like to invite Kristina Plauscher-Kreins. She is Director for the Government Communication Office of Slovenia in Ljubljana. And I also would like to invite Sofia Ratz. She is the UN Youth Delegate of Hungary. But she is also one of the representatives of the Young Blood Strategic Forum. So, there's this back-to-back event taking place, and we did a small video competition, smartphone competition, to select one representative from the youth to join us on the panel. So Sophia will be our youth voice today. Thank you very much. You also see this empty chair. This empty chair is not there for Christian Resch, who was supposed to join us. He works for the German MFA, and he is the Deputy Director for Stabilization and Conflict Prevention. He could unfortunately not join us today because he had a personal problem. But this empty chair is for you. And as Ahmed pointed out, we have representatives from government authorities, we have representatives from private sector, research, military. And I would like you to think throughout the panel about points that you can add to the discussion. So either a perspective that we don't have present here because you're working for the private sector, or a country that is not present here. Would like to hear your challenges, but also your solutions. And feel free to join this empty seat as a citizen also, because that's what we're trying to bridge, the gap between citizens or people and institutions. So you can choose your cap. This chair will remain empty for the first round of questions, so I will ask some questions. But then I would ask you, if you feel like you want to join us here on the panel, just grab one of the chairs in the front row so I can see that you want to join us, and I will invite you to basically take that chair. I would ask you to briefly introduce yourself so we know who you are, and then just make your point, raise your question, bring in some added value from a different perspective, because that's really what we want to hear today, different perspectives and finding solutions to this joint challenge. Marcus, let me start with you, basically. So the OECD Government at a Glance report from 2007 actually gives a pretty mitigated picture of the current level of trust in institutions. So according to this report, less than half of the citizens of the OECD countries actually trust their national government, and that's quite worrying. Having said that, on a more positive note, there are actually countries where we see gain in trust happening and where the governments manage to get the trust from their citizens. And these countries, according to the latest report, include the Slovak Republic, but also Israel and Germany. I'd like to hear from you, what's the secret of these countries? What do they do right?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is one issue that worries us a lot. Trust is a major enabler, is a social glue, you know, and I think it's very, very difficult for governments to implement reforms or to I'll say, exercise their functions as governments if there is no trust. Let me just go back for what you said. Indeed, if you look at the average level of trust in OECD countries is a little bit above 40%, and worse, you know, and beyond looking at the number itself, has been a gradual erosion of trust. And I think that's what we should look at. Over the past 10, 12 years, gradual erosion of trust almost everywhere. It's not only, of course, trust in governments, but it's also trust in parliaments, trust in political parties, trust in institutions in general. And going even a little bit finer into the data, you see that certain groups typically have even lower trust than the average, and I talk about youth. And in most OECD countries, young people trust governments less than the average, which is serious. And I think that's what we should take that very, very, very seriously. And this reflects in so many ways, you know, and if you look at, for instance, turnout in elections for young people. In an average OECD countries, turnout among people under 25 years old is almost 20 percentage points below the average. This is the future of our democracies that really are at stake here. Now, and the question is, why do you see this erosion of trust? And this is the job we have to do and to answer those questions and then make recommendations how to regain that trust. What we have seen very, very clearly that the erosion of trust is linked to economic conditions. Of course, the crisis in 2008 played a major role. But more even than the crisis itself is the increase in inequalities that is very clearly linked to the decline in trust. The issue of, I mean, a certain anger that people feel about corruption, the problems with integrity in many countries, the feeling that the political system is not defending their own interests. So all that very clearly leads to this erosion of trust. Now, the countries that are doing a little bit better, and again, we should be very careful before we look at year-to-year changes, no? Because this is a perception. We're measuring perceptions here, and it can be affected by so many things, and from the electoral cycles to the decrease in unemployment, or even by the success of a particular country in a sports competition. So we have to make sure that we are filtering this down. But the countries that have managed to buck the trend are the ones who have, first of all, invested in more participation from citizens. Very, very clearly, it's something that came out in the video that we have seen. More and more countries, and the OECD is now promoting what we call open government policies, and I can go into that a little bit later. And many countries have participatory budgets, joint delivery of public services. There are lots of ways and more good practices that we can see happening in countries about having citizens participating in decision making. Of course, the countries that are putting in place the right mechanisms to build integrity and fight against corruption, and that's a very broad issue, but countries that are, for instance, leading with conflict of interest, which are putting some disciplines in lobbying and the influence of special interest in the political system. There are lots of countries, and you can see that there's an improvement of trust when you put in place integrity policies. And last but not least, the countries that are being successful are the ones who understand also that they have to do, as governments, they have to do their job well in terms of providing public services. And more countries are investing in being more efficient in providing public services, using new technologies, simplification procedures. So when the citizen has to deal with the state from getting a document to processing a form, that the experience is efficient, and that also has a major effect on the level of trust in society as a whole.
Thank you very much, Marcos. We'll get back to you with a couple of questions. Christina, I was wondering, Marcos mentioned the word perception, and there are increasingly blurred lines out there between perception and facts, and media, which is our source of information to build our public opinion, is increasingly mistrusted because we just simply don't know anymore what is true. It's like what TV, radio, social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, what they tell us, is that actually true? And this like sense of mistrust doesn't make it easy for us to judge if institutions are actually delivering on their role or not, and if they're delivering good or well. So I was just wondering, from your experience, what can you do to change the image of institutions, basically? And how do you reach your citizens? How do you make sure that you basically get the information out there, which is like more of a collective truth than what is out there currently? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this very challenging panel. I expect that it will be a unique learning experience also for me. So I kind of expected that we would be all in one round, so I could benefit from knowledgeable public. And answering your questions, I would come back to basics, what also Marco said. Basically, it's not so much readjusting our image, but it's basically strengthening and improving on our actions. We should, do our core mission and tasks in a better way, and this would, kind of bridge a mistrust between state institutions and the citizens. Actually, trust rests on the expectations that our actions would be based on commitment to shared values and beliefs. So the state institutions are based on legitimacy, accountability, responsibility, then also on being representative, and last but not least, being effective. Basically what people expect from us, that we deliver, and we are evaluated on the basis of how effective we are in solving problems and issues in public domain, and how well this is perceived by the people. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. So also in communication field, also communication professionals, in state institutions, we are bound by constitutional legal frameworks. So our basic mission, and that's why I stress this in this very essential didactical way, because sometimes we get confused with the role of communication professionals or representatives from private sector or corporations. Our basic role within the given frameworks in public domain is ensuring the transparency and public character of the government work. So we have a specific responsibility, through our work. So I would be beware of using the word of image, because the image of state institutions should be really based on our true commitment, our true work. And basically the image here is a sum of perceptions, as you pointed out, by the citizens. But basically what the citizens are asking themselves when they perceive our work is, what is in it for me? Which is also a basic corrective for our work, because basically in general we are supposed to provide service for the people, but also by the people. So let me kind of stress and focus on this last part. Also in our communication work, building and maintaining trust. Interestingly, by the latest European Communication Monitor 2018, performed in 48 countries, trust represents the most important issues perceived by communication professionals to be devoted to, and this is the first time ever that this, research has been done. Even in 2007, in the most dire, economic crisis, this was not perceived as the most important issue. So obviously, we are most aware, and it's a necessity to be tangled, but still, on all levels, I'm talking a lot with my European colleagues. We don't have a universal recipe, but let me point out in 4 points, what are the points or the ways in how to address it, or how to navigate towards it. It's not just about tools. You were saying media, social media, and so forth, but it's important how we formulate our approach. So you were mentioning that we should strengthen the participation. So one of the most important domains we should focus and work more, and we're still, learning by doing it, which is also okay, because also the process itself really matters if it's communicated well and done in a very sincere way. So we should connect and interact with people to a larger degree, not only through media, traditional, through web and so forth, social media, but also be there, be in the field, listen to them, interact them, and most of all, not come to people with the set agenda, but include the problems they recognize, and try to address them then through our actions and policies. Also in the field, it's important to work with trustworthy, credible, reliable multiplicators, not only as a state representative, but also through other, actors in local communities and societies. And you were mentioning some of the methods also OECD is using. We are using, let's say, more simple or modest methods like field visits, holding citizens consultations in smaller circles, in local communities. We have a very important initiative on the European level, the Macron initiative, which works well. It depends on the member state how they implement it, but I believe that citizens consultations should be done by themselves, really to give the feedback to the government and to our policies, not just because it's a European initiative. Also developing direct call, direct contact centers for citizens, really responding to the questions not only through traditional PR, tools, press conferences, whatever, trying to open the doors of the state institutions to work more on showing, not just telling, preaching, lecturing. We have a very efficient tool at our government communication office, which is called Propose to the Government. So the citizens can send proposals on different issues, like, for example, the most popular was that diapers should be excluded from taxes. And as to the support by the citizens, these proposals are sent to the relevant ministers, which have to respond to them, you know, like, or to include them in their policies. So it's a very popular tool. To not extend my remarks too much, I would say that also, most of all, we should work on our side. We should, in this competition of all diverse voices, fake news and so forth, we should strengthen our own official voices in being credible, you know, in being recognized as, you know, state, government, ministers and so forth. Also improve on our reaction. We should be critical of ourselves. We should be the first to inform, not the last to react, to correct, and so forth, because most of the stories are already made when, you know, the government or the state institutions are asked for their responses. Thirdly, maybe also very importantly, we should work more on better understanding of our messages, illustrate, explain, provide stories. Again, here also, with every method, not necessarily that we would succeed, but we should be also more daring, also on the basis of trial and error. Also, you know, talking to people, consulting with people. It might be more risky exercise, more lengthy exercise, taking more effort, but I think in long run, giving more legitimacy and building really on this relationship and trust to our citizens. So in conclusion, I would say that besides instead of working more on traditional media relations, we should work more on public affairs or on direct democracy methods to improve on our trust.
Thank you very much, Christina, for sharing some concrete examples how the Slovenian government is actually working on communication beyond traditional media. Sophia, I have a question for you, but first I will spare you the question of how old you are. I won't ask you, but I will let you know that half of the population globally is under the age of 30. So that's a quite impressive number, especially if you keep in mind that actually the average age of parliamentarians globally is 53, and the average age of heads of states is 62. These are average numbers. That brings me to my next point, which is basically, it is probably not surprising that young people don't necessarily feel represented in politics and government. They don't feel, that their needs are taken care of. But I really would like to take advantage of your presence, Sophia, to give us some insights and tell us maybe a bit more about why young people are so frustrated, or maybe they're not, with institutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really pleased to be here, especially because, as you mentioned, there are certain groups that tend to have less trust in institutions than others, and yes, we young people are one of these groups. You know, being a youth delegate to the United Nations, of course, has provided me with the chance to have first-hand experience in how the world of diplomacy works. And at the age of 20, I can tell you it was really fascinating to be there among 193 countries and see how it works. But after, 2 or 3 weeks, you start to discover the dark sides of any institution after the first enchantment when you're there. And I can tell you that I somehow understand that why young people have declining trust, for example, in the UN, because it's not just young people, it's adults as well. And as a Hungarian, I can tell you that there are countries that don't have a huge trust in the UN. So from my perspective, when it comes to declining trust, I mean, for the perspective of young people, it's very two-sided. I have talked to lots of young people on this subject. And one group says that we don't receive enough information. We have no idea and no knowledge about how institutions work. But the other part is that we, in the 21st century, are overloaded with information. We receive hundreds of news every day. But the thing is that, and here I refer to the role of the media, we don't know what is fake news, what we should believe in or we should not believe in. As for the point that you raised, like you said that you understand why young people feel that they are not represented. You know, the thing is that they don't want to be represented. They want to be present. They want to be in the process of decision making. I can tell you that as a young people, we don't, I think we would have trust towards institutions. The thing is that it can be only developed by inclusion and practice, because if we only receive, you know, the results and we don't know how the process of, for example, decision making works, we won't feel that we were included in the decisions, that they were only made like for us but not with us. And when it comes to trust, I think it's a very important question. And maybe if you would answer it, I would be very happy. Like, do you think it is earned or rather guaranteed? Earned. Thank you. Well, yeah. Especially when it comes to young people, you don't just, you know, deserve our trust. You need to earn it if you're in institutions, because we tend to be very critical thinking, and we really want to be included in the processes. But at the same time, I wouldn't put all the responsibility to the institutions, because I think, you know, being passive won't lead to anywhere. But we young people, thankfully, have this very proactive mentality. We are the ones who sometimes break out even revolutions, and we are the ones who would like to change the future. So as a voice of young people here, I can only say that we don't want to be represented, we want to be present and included in the procedures.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and that's why we're so happy to have you here today, because you're not just like represented. We really have someone young here who can give us some insights and like basically talk for the youth. Yes. So, and of course you're not the youth, you're just like one person, but still I understand you took advantage of the Young Blood Strategic Forum to also consult your fellows and to see a bit what the issues are. So thank you very much, and we're glad to have you here. Marcos, my next question. I was wondering, so there's an OECD Trust Lab, and one of the findings of the OECD Trust Lab is basically there is a mismatch, between self-reported trust and implicit trust. So basically, there's a mismatch between people's behavior towards institution and their response in opinion polls. So that makes it very difficult to actually be aware of the level of trust. And we have a lot of statistics out there, but like, how do we really measure the level of trust in institution? Because understanding the level will help us to better design policies that address that gap. So I'd like to hear that from you.
Can I talk about youth just for 1 second?
Of course, always.
I was very stimulated by what Sophia had said, and it's something that is very much part of the discussion. Before we get into the indicators, I can talk about that too. But the issue of youth participation is something that is essential for the future of our democracies. And what we have been observing in many OECD countries is that more and more you have, when legislation is passed or some types of regulation, a mandatory consultation mechanism with youth. It works, doesn't always work in practice, but is a step, and then you see, of course, youth is not uniform. You don't have necessarily a recognized youth association that speaks for everybody, but you see already the beginnings of an effort. So A for effort, not necessarily for results. But beyond that, you're already seeing more and more countries, and what Sophia said is very, very important. They want to be present. They just don't want to be consulted. They want to be part of the decision-making process. You have countries that started to implement reserved number of seats in parliaments or political parties for youth. An example, of course, Sweden. Sweden has, if I'm not mistaken, 25% of every party has to have 25% of the candidates under 35. So the definition of youth, of course, maybe for you 35 seems old, but someone like me is still young. But that's legislated. Yeah. And then if you look at across OECD countries, the level of, let's say, young, quote unquote, I think 35 or 40, I think below 40, number of people below 40 in parliaments. And you see the Scandinavians are up there, that 30, 35% of the parliament is relatively young. And then you contrast that with some other countries that have no policy whatsoever, and the worst are Korea. I think the The number of people under 40 in parliament is like 2%, and followed by the US. Number of people in parliament under 40 at something like 7 or 8%. But anyway, but you see very clearly that some countries are now putting their money where their mouth is and really taking this very, very seriously, and it's something that we at the OECD very much encourage them to do. And we are trying to develop good practices that we can disseminate and countries can learn from each other on how to put in place those youth-centered policies. And even sometimes some countries, I think that's also Canada, for instance, already having a youth lens on their budget process. So when they're looking at their budget and they look at the different budget lines and say, okay, how is this particular spending going to affect the different groups in society by age brackets, but also gender, minority. So that's the kind of process that helps your decision making, and you understand how your budget, which is pretty much the mother of all policy tools, how we can make decisions based on how this is going to affect different groups in society. Anyway, sorry for this detour, but I thought Sophia was...
Thank you. No, thank you very much for making that point. I just would like to add one thing, that youth is not just the future, it's actually already the present. Absolutely. So just to highlight that. But yeah, if you could say something about the indicators.
Absolutely.
But just the measurement, like how difficult it is to understand what is happening out there.
Anyway, so that's, sorry for that
no, thank you very much.
But now on the measurement, you're absolutely right. Now, measuring trust is not something that is very easy, is subjective. And what you see is a matter of perception, that you ask the person at a certain time of the day may have a different answer if you ask at a different time of the day. But what we have been trying to do is first of all to distinguish between trust, what we call the institutional trust, and political trust. I think that's the first distinction that you have to make. One thing is if you ask, do you trust your health system or you trust your education system, because you actually have a concrete experience dealing with those health or education services. Another thing, if you ask, do you trust the government, period? And then it's more of a political judgment, and depending which party is in power and which party you're supporting, you may have a different answer. So we have to be very, very careful what you're actually measuring. But you mentioned something very, very new, and thank you for that, is the issue of what we call implicit trust, and it's more the psychometric type tests, and where it's not just a one-off, do you trust yes or no, black or white. You use much more sophisticated techniques to try to understand. But this is really the beginning. The initial results of this work, and it's very promising, very, very promising. The initial results shows that implicit trust is actually higher than if you were just to ask yes or no questions. So we're trying to understand a little bit what's behind this. It's very early days, but you touch on a very important issue. We cannot just measure trust blindly in a black and white situation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just a quick remark, because I really love how you highlighted that there are countries where, for example, in the parliament there are seats reserved for young people. The thing is that these are the minority, and in the majority, for example, in the Hungarian parliament we have only a few youth representatives, and I've always been thinking, like, what's the cause of this? And one of the most common criteria that young people receive if they want to be included in decision-making processes is that they don't have enough experience or knowledge. What these people tend to forget is that they were in those shoes as well once back in their lives. So my question today for not including young people in these processes is, how do you expect us to have experience if you don't provide us, like, at the very early stage of our life, gaining experience? Because we can only gain experience if we see from a first-hand experience what you really do. And it's not a problem if it's not perfect. It's not a problem if you're still working on it. Let us be there and let us, provide you. I mean, I don't know who I'm talking to, like everybody right now. So let us be there and see how you work, and let us learn from you. Because decision makers tend to think that young people are passive and they are arrogant and they don't want to learn and they are just big-headed. No, we would like to learn from you. I mean, we know that you have lots of knowledge and lots of experience. We would like to learn from you. And also, it is my personal experience, because when we had the selection process for the youth delegate position back in Hungary, in the finals, it was the 6 of us, and I can tell you that I was the least qualified. I was the one who had the least experience, And when it turned out that they appointed me as an next youth delegate, my first question was, why? I mean, my predecessor, who is sitting here, he can tell that I was very, like, I don't know, frustrated why I was selected. And you know, what he told me is that this position is not about knowledge or experience. It's about potential, whether or not you have the potential to gain experience and knowledge or not. And if you have the potential, knowledge and experience is something that will come after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you. Christina, I have a question. So we see a new trend out there of politicians neglecting facts, like basically labeling them as either fake news or conspiracy, and it's very worrying because it's about basically instrumentalizing media. And I know you work beyond media, but I was just wondering what your take is on that and what that means for the future.
Not only politicians are using fake news, so but anyway, let me start with the basic presumption that facts are still fundamental, obviously, but they're not sufficient anymore. So it's very important how we give narratives, you know. So also in communication, we are not, you know, sure about the ways. We don't have universal recipes. So it's very important, you know, that we still use facts, but we are like looking at the ways, you know, how these facts can be properly framed, put into understandable human interest stories. How can they be properly interpreted, analyzed, but not, you know, in a sense that it, you know, that trends would be too simplified. And we need to work more. There's still a lot of challenges and maneuver space to work on clear, consistent, understandable, truthful messages in real communication context. The institutions, we still tend to communicate in abstract statistics, trends, policies, and so forth. So we should work more, you know, to show, you know, to use also audiovisual, you know, ways to explain to people, to give examples, best practices, also best practices through human experiences. I believe they're more the most convincible, because when we see a person, you know, similar to us, you know, succeeding in something, it shows us the way, you know. We should also work with more positive alternative, you know, showing that, you know, fake news or authoritarian or populist, you know, trends, hate speech, it's not a proper response. That, you know, the real you know, positive alternative is democracy, you know, trying, you know, to live and work together. Also, we should learn more, because in state institutions we tend to work with with rational, you know, discourse. We should learn to work more with empathy. That's why it brings me back again, you know, we should work more with people, participate, because this is also a unique learning experience. And it brings me, I want to comment also on working and including the youth. I think this can be a major asset, because basically we don't have solutions within our fixed frameworks. And the youth who is freshly minded, you know, not bound by organizational cultures, also using all the modern media, can sometimes show the creative way, because they're daring, they're not putting limits, they're revolutionary. So in this sense, you know, besides, you know, insisting on, you know, facts and trying to strengthen the communication on these real facts, we are also trying to find ways, you know, how to be more creative in reaching more and more individualized audiences who are not using traditional media and so forth. So at our office, when we are facing the challenges of social media, and we are all of, I don't know, 35, 40, 45, you know, so it was not like our common way of communication. And I said, okay, to a certain degree, we can get, you know, qualified, but, you know, why not including those who are using them, whose lifestyle it is? So we have a very successful cooperation with one of the high school in media, you know, also, you know, because they're very experienced technologically, but also, you know, kind of opening our minds, you know, because as we said, we shouldn't talk about youth without them, and, you know, we, the adults, or whoever, you know, formulating their problems. We have no idea, you know, what their problems is. So basically, we should let them sit at the same table and formulate their problems, their dilemmas. We had some of the attempts. We should work more on it. We had a joint government session with the representative of youth by the Council of Youth and several very engaged youth organizations. And I was amazed how well these young representatives not only scanned the existing policies, but also gave very consistent proposals to the government, to the ministries. And in this respect, one could somehow overcome, let's say, the or organizational limitations, each minister's just thinking about their own field of, you know, addressing the youth, but really, you know, kind of putting youth and also other dilemmas of modern societies on a higher level as priorities, and really try, you know, to mainstream whatever the ministries is. Because the point is that people don't look for, you know, ministries or information on institutions. They are looking, you know, for, you know, information or solutions to their life situation. So we should also try, you know, to change our mentality framework, you know. They don't care who solves the problems, just, you know, they somehow expect from the state institutions in general that they're responsible and that they deliver. So it's also lots to be done on our part. Again, it's not just blaming on the media or whoever, but we should try harder and, you know, not be afraid to include others, among them, of course, firstly, the youth who are like, I strongly stress, they're part of the present, you know, present solutions.
Thank you very much. And also for highlighting the human aspect, actually. So thank you very much. So Sophia, I still have one question, and then I'll open the floor for someone of you who wants to join us here. So Sophia, we discussed actually that youth are part of the solution, and basically it takes two to tango. So it's not just about the institution doing things, it's about the youth also getting on board. So I was just wondering if you have some ideas on, like, beyond quota, which was mentioned, but also being present, for example, today is like a small step, but it will hopefully make it more common in those kind of settings to have youth representatives. So if you could just like share some like ideas on like how we could get youth on board, but also from a youth perspective. So not just like institutions creating space for youth, but also youth proactively engaging on those kind of topics. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to catch up quickly on what you said, I think it's very important to see that today decision makers tend to think that due to their knowledge and experience, they cannot learn anything from young people because they are younger and they don't have that much of knowledge. I think they can learn is just different types of topics and subjects on which they can learn. And I really like that you highlighted that it's very important when you talk about young people to use the language of young people, because if you use that, you will start to develop a trust, and they won't even notice, but they will start to develop their own trust towards you, because they will feel that you really try to talk to them on their own language. And yes, I completely agree with the fact that it takes two to tango, and it's not just the responsibility of one side or the other side. It may seem very abstract for first hearing, but I think what we need the most from both parties is the change of mindset. And I know it's very easy to, criticize things. Nothing works perfectly in this world. We will always be able to find errors in the system. But here I would like to put the bigger responsibility on young people, because we cannot expect institutions to, work perfectly. It's not about working perfectly. If we want to institutions to be transparent and accountable, we should be the ones who make them transparent and accountable. But we need the help of the institutions institutions to include us. And once we're there, we can already work for what we think is a solution, and also to live with our rights. I mean, we can have this freedom of information requests in many states, that you have the freedom and the right to request information, and they have to provide you with information. And this is a shout out for all young people, that if you are passive aggressive and just waiting for the information to approach you, you will receive information, but it may not be the information that you need. Only you know what type of information you need, and you are the one who can look for that information. Also, there are these citizens' charters from which we can learn what are our citizen rights and how can we become responsible citizens in our countries. Also, there are lots of NGOs who provide you with free legal advice on your rights. So I think we have all the tools needed today. The only thing left for us young people is to use them and live with them.
Thank you very much for this positive comment. So the way we wanted to do that is that you take advantage of the expertise that we have in the room. And as highlighted by Ahmed, we have a quite diverse audience here. So I'll open the floor for someone to join here. The way it would work is like, please, if you want to join us here on the panel, sit in the first row. And I think we already have a first volunteer, a second one already. So just like take a seat there so I will see who wants to join us. I would briefly ask you to introduce yourself and then to either come in with a different perspective or to ask a question. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I will be quiet.
Well, hello everyone. Some of you might already know that I am the predecessor of Zsófia. I am András Willem, and I'm working on sustainability. And since I don't want to repeat anything that has been said on this panel, I would rather put my philosophical hat on and bring a very different perspective. When I think about democracy, I think the most basic prerequisite of having properly functioning democratic systems is our belief in free will. And I think that the atomization of society, individualism, also sped up by technological advance, has really questioned people's belief in free will. And also, it created this sense that that we are alone. So when I was a youth delegate, I met lots of people who told me that I just feel simply too small to make an impact, to make a change. I don't really think that my voice counts, and you can tell me whatever, that will not change. So what I'm really interested in, and I'd be really happy to hear your points on this, do you think that somehow we can restore the trust of young people in free will, even if we think that actually how sort of technology presents us, we are sort of approaching a post-free will world, in the sense that we see that lots of the things we can predict, we can calculate, and we less and less believe in chance? And also, do you think that sort of restoring the idea of having or of being a part of a community could help us restore trust in institutions? Because if we are parts of communities, we feel more safe. And do you think that this is something very closely connected with the problem of living without identity nowadays? I think this is a huge thing for my generation. All of these people I meet, they ask themselves, who am I? Now, if you can't tell who are you, how are you supposed to have trust in anything? You can't even trust yourself. So I'm really curious about your perspectives on this.
Those are big questions you're asking. I'm not even sure who feels like, yeah, sure. Marcus. Thank you.
Not necessarily answering the question exactly as it was posed, but just perhaps some thoughts, some additional thoughts from following on in your line of thinking. You are 1 out of 7 billion people on Earth. You are 1 out of 500 million Europeans. 1 out of 10 million Hungarians, if I calculate the population right. Yes, I mean, this is a fact of life. But I think what you're seeing here in many experiences, and I mentioned the issue of more participatory democracy, participatory budgeting. that the most successful experiences are actually at the local or infra-local levels. And you see some examples in the Netherlands, in Brazil, in Portugal, where you're trying to get local communities involved in deciding, for instance, you allocate a budget to a school, and then it is the parents, the school, that decide if they're going to build a tennis court or if they're going to buy books. You know, this is, but there are lots of initiatives like that that allow you to feel part of a community. You know, I mean, people say all politics are local, but that's where you start at least. You know, and then of course you can build up. So just a little ray of hope to say that indeed. It is probably hard to make a dent if you're one of 7 billion people. You know, even if you go to the UN, sometimes they realize it's not that simple.
You realize it every day.
But I think more and more, the more experiences we have at local level, things that matter to you. If you're in a school and you're able to allocate the budget, or how, I mean, that's more and more countries having those experiences, and it helps a lot to build a sense of community in a very small scale.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andre. I will ask the next person to join us here on the panel. And as I said, like, feel free to come in the first row so I can see who wants to join us. Hi.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Clara Tini. I was the former G20 youth delegate for the G20 in Germany last year. And that's why also I know the other delegates we met last year for another conference. I would like to bring the discussion in another perspective, not just in terms of youth, but also I think we're missing an important point, which is inequalities in our societies. Because if we see, for example, at European election or actually worldwide, the society is getting polarized. Not so many people have a sex in education as we had in the past. I'm bringing, for example, the case of Italy. And I think also now that a lot of young people in general, people that are also 50 or even 60 that are voting for populist parties, they also don't know what means public affairs, advocacy. They don't even know why they should be engaged in politics. And I've having this discussion for a long time, and why I'm applying for, I don't know, let's say leadership programs like G20 on, etc. And maybe why I have this mindset, why I'm, for example, an advocate for women leadership, why I founded this initiative, why I wanted to work in public affairs. And I think it's because maybe I wasn't born in a very privileged family that actually, honestly, you need in Italy in order to assess this environment. But what my family and parents gave it to me was education. I mean, for example, I was just reading a lot and I could have meaningful discussions. And actually, I was so lucky that I could have that mindset and that could be also engaged in society and try to at least have an influence. And I bring as an example what happened at the G20, and everyone would say, oh my God, these kids, youth delegates, they think they're so amazing and brilliant, what they're really doing. And okay, sometimes I might agree on that, not all leadership programs are useful, but at least what we did at the G20, for example, I was the editor of the priority Empowering Women. And at the end, if you compare our position paper from the youth perspective and the G20 leaders one, we did an influence at least on that priority. And I did the same also in Italy and also pushing and talking about women in STEM. And in December, the Ministry of Education drafted a law, and now all Italian girls can study STEM subjects for free. I'm not saying it's like, of course, 100% my merit or even 1 or 5%. Maybe let's say 0.00001. I'm kind of proud that I was pushing that agenda. So the question that I would like to tell you, how we can also, let's say, avoid or those inequalities in our society. Because I believe the key to save us, I mean, as European citizens, at least for the next election, or I say in a long-term perspective, is to learn, for example, civic values at universities, also create easier access to university, as in Germany or in other countries. Because as I saw from Italy, people that can access politics or boardrooms, they're just coming from privileged families, and that's not fair, and it's not even good for our economy or society.
Thank you very much, Clarity. It's again a big question, how to address inequalities. It's something that is actually quite challenging. And I will turn again towards Marcos, because I was thinking as OECD you recommend a lot of countries, I guess, how to do that. So I was just wondering.
No, of course. I mean, we can talk about anything you want. But I think, first of all, just to come back what said at the beginning, the issue of trust and the issue of inequalities are very closely linked. An increase in inequalities in societies have been shown to be linked to a decrease in trust. And what we have observed over the past 20, 30 years is a general increase in inequalities in rich countries, in poor countries. It is very, very general. We don't need to go why that's the case. No, that's a whole different discussion. But then what can we do about it? And we need to do something about it. And many countries are failing to do something effective about it. If you look at the obvious one answer is that at the very least you need equality of opportunity. No, you don't necessarily need to have everybody having the same income. That's not what we should be aiming at. But you need equality of opportunity. Society needs to be merit-based. You know, people have the opportunity to study, to make a contribution to society. And what we very clearly see is that governments traditionally are the main actors to correct inequalities through tax policies, to spending policies in social programs or in many other types of spending. If you look at the measures of inequality, and we can measure how much you have an inequality before governments intervene and how much you have after governments intervene. And what you have in Europe traditionally, with the build-up of social safety nets up until the 60s and 70s, you saw the government was very effective in reducing inequalities in societies. And it's becoming less and less so. Then we start looking at why it's becoming less effective in doing so. Tax policies are becoming less progressive. Spending is becoming less effective as a social equalizer. And so that's the kind of thing that needs to be corrected. And now we at the OECD are very clearly looking at this very, very broad lessons on how can the governments be more effective in correcting, using tax and spending to face inequalities. Then, of course, what you're investing on, if you invest in a good education, universal free education, universal free healthcare, all those things are, again, very important elements beyond this income transfer to create equality of opportunity. So this is, in general, I mean, this is a whole discussion. We can have a whole panel to discuss inequalities, but I would say this is the overall lessons. So your experience is very clearly very relevant to that discussion.
Thank you, and thank you, Clarity, for joining us. Yeah, I think we have someone else here lined up.
So my name is Colette Mazzucchelli, and I'm a member of the Global Diplomacy Lab. Thank you for your comments and sharing your insights. When I first began to teach, I started at the Budapest University of Economic Sciences. This was in, well, I won't date myself, but it was a long time ago. And at the time, Hungary was in transition. So there were a lot of questions about what it meant to participate, what it meant to be actually coming into one's own in terms of identity and in terms of Europe. And as I was teaching there, and it was the best experience I think I had teaching, well, I had the best walk to work of my life over that beautiful bridge. And fantastic, fantastic city. But what I recall most, because I was working with very young people, was that they had a lot of questions about learning and about participating and about belonging, really. In the sense of really being part of a community. What does it mean really to have a transition really from one type of system to another type of system? And I wanted to ask the panelists here, today we work a great deal with social media, so the contacts are not always person to person, they're filtered. And filtering can be very dangerous if you want to establish trust and if you want to develop democratic participation, communication, listening in particular. First, for you as our young representative, what does it mean for you to engage as a citizen? I mean, what are the responsibilities you think you have to engage in a democratic polity, and why is that important to you? And then for our colleague on the end there, you spoke about empathy, which I agree with. How do we develop empathy in the present day and age when many things are filtered in the conversations that we have? I often think that the more we rely on technology, perhaps the less we listen and the less we are capable of developing and showing empathy for my other or the other. Sometimes the lines become sharper and sharper. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that. And then finally for you, sir, a very direct question, because you mentioned the difficulties with inequalities. I think that in Europe, you took a great deal of time to develop the system of the safety net. And it strikes me that globalization is very much tearing that net. Is there any way that Europe can come up with its own solution in the face of the tear, in the face of globalization's pressures, to try to redress the balance and bring it back a little bit more towards this idea of a safety net? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colette. So these are a lot of questions. If you don't mind keeping your answers short, and I think we'll still have one intervention and 2 interventions, and then we'll wrap it up. Super, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the nice comments on Budapest and Hungary. You're always welcome, anytime. And for me, being engaged actually is in connection with the topic of this whole conference, is being a bridge, which comes from my position that I need to be a bridge or a messenger between decision makers and young people, and also serving as a living example or motivation. Because what I do is when I travel across the country and go to high schools and universities to talk with young people about the program, since I'm a UN youth delegate, I talk a lot about sustainable development goals. And yes, it's a common phenomena that András also mentioned, that they feel that they are too small or not enough to accomplish things. And what I always try to highlight is telling them that I wasn't enough. It's not about being enough, it's becoming enough. So that's what I would answer to your question.
Thank you very much for your question. It actually, stresses my point exactly, that we shouldn't be somehow misled, by all the technological advances and rapid changes. That's why I was stressing so much to come back to basics, because obviously all the administration, either the state, either the international administration, whatsoever, we are at risk of closing ourselves into ivory towers, doing loads of tasks, papers, analysis, so forth, and pretending that they have certain purpose. So, but our the basic question is, for whom do we function for? What is our purpose? And this human dimension that basically we are here for the people, for their concrete situations and problems, somehow drives us to work on on a common human characteristics, which depend on, of course, on our personality structure and socialization and upbringing. But empathy in its definition means being able to reach out beyond your egocentric or particularistic perceptions, needs, interests, which is quite difficult, but still in this sense, this is the necessary prerequisite that we really deliver what we are here for. So my point exactly is, to work on live experience, on live interaction, beside all the media work, all the technological support we have, but not to be misled by tools only, that we should focus on our purpose, This was the buzzword also yesterday, that panels, and I really liked it, you know, through all the centuries of our technological and other advances, you know, we should still work on our human dimension, you know. Thank you.
Very easy question, but let me just again share some thoughts. It's not like we have all the answers, but let me share some thoughts. What I think there's a broad consensus in Europe, aside from some fringes, that is an essential part of the social contract. That you need a social safety net. The question then becomes, as this safety net that was built starting in the 30s in most of Europe. If it was creating the right incentives, it was incentives for entrepreneurship, incentives for work, incentives for say advancement. So what we have observed over time is that there were some problems with the system as it was designed, and I'm thinking specifically of the pension systems. So many countries are now trying piecemeal reforms with the idea that you need to reform the social safety net for it to survive. And I think that what we have observed in the OECD, that there are many ways you can do that. Keeping the basic tenets of the social safety net, but creating the right incentives within that safety net. And there are many countries in Europe that have experience with I would say radical changes in the pension system and then the employment insurance system, in even the tax system, where you keep the market economy functioning effectively, but you do maintain this good level of a social safety net. So I think that what I would say is that is not incompatible. You can still have a functioning market economy with the right incentives, with a social safety net, but you need to rethink, you need to reform, and I think that's what governments need to be explaining to citizens. And coming back to the topic, if you do not have the trust, then it's very difficult to explain to people that you need to make changes to some of the things they cherish, but are essential for it to survive. You know, aging, population agency, globalization, and competition from abroad. So all those things that are our reality today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Perhaps when I bring my students in January to Hungary, you would speak with them.
Please, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Colette. So I understand there is
You're welcome to bring them to Paris as well. It's on the way.
What about Nairobi? Nairobi.
Thank you.
So just to let you know that there's no session in the room afterwards, so it's not too tricky that we're coming to the end of the time. But I still would like to invite our two... We can also sit here. No, just join us here. Just join us here, but I just want to say that, like, yeah, in theory we're out of time, so, but I would still like to listen to your intervention. I just wanted to make you aware, basically. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome. I made special efforts. So, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Alenka Verbole. I have been for the past 25 years working on democracy and good governance in different countries all over the world. So, what I take from this discussion, which was very interesting, thank you all for your inputs, are several dimensions. On one side, it's about building trust between citizens and institutions, also building bridges. But at the same time, we should not neglect the dimension of good governance. And I think OECD has done here quite a lot work. And I would specifically like, it was also fleshed out by our young colleague, Sophia, the issue of accountability, transparency, also, last but not least, corruption. The issue of corruption is here essential. And also, citizens' charters were mentioned. We should also mention code of conduct of different public persons and personalities in government. One of the issues which was not really touched upon, or slightly, is the issue of media literacy. We know that in spite of overcrowded information, too much information, fake information, many people, including young people, are not able to really critically analyze and take out of information that they need. Sophia has actually a little bit hinted at it, that you take what you need. However, you need also some basic frameworks to be able to do so. And I think here the issue of civic education is essential. And this has been quite neglected. I'm happy to see that through different initiatives, most of them non-formalized, we heard the work of NGOs, different organizations, is taking place. However, my question to all the panel members is, how do you see the role of civic education, your experiences, and possibly any future steps in that direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I will direct the question to Sophia. Okay. So if you would like to say something about civic education.
Yeah, sure. Well, my experience with civic education is not a nice thing, because it was included in our curriculum in high school, but you know, we usually had history lessons instead of that, so that was kind of the civic education that we received. I really don't know whether we should include it in the curriculum or add it as an extra curriculum activity, or because you know, when you use an extra curriculum activity, students usually don't go there. So as for curriculum, I think it should be included, but I really like that you mentioned the non-formal tools that we should use. And what I would highlight here is to put a bigger emphasis on soft skills instead of hard skills, because our problem back in Hungary is that our education system is everything but not ready for the challenges of the 21st century, which is, for example, media literacy. But now we have this best practice that I would like to share with you. It's called the Digital Wellbeing of Young People. It's a separate program with separate responsibles for that, and now it's starting to be included in the curriculum and even in extracurricular activity. So maybe this is not the most professional answer that I could give you, but I'm all for civic education.
Thank you. I was told there's still one point that urgently needs to be done.
I'm so sorry, I made so many points. Already one of the previous commenters mentioned, we should also talk, of course, about other vulnerable groups and their participation, because good governance also foresees inclusiveness. So we should also talk about minorities, disabled people, elderly, and so on. So, yeah.
As for that, I'm sure you know about the No Hate Speech movement, and we have that back in Hungary. It operates under the National Youth Council, and what they are dealing with is vulnerable and marginalized group. And what personally I like most from their profile is that they have these certain workshops and campaigns against internet bullying.
Thank you. So,
if I may comment on the media literacy, thank you very much for a very relevant, you know, systemic proposition. Actually, children in Slovene schools, they have civic education and also optional courses on media literacy. Of course, it depends on the teacher, you know, how this is performed, but not to go into theory of media literacy, which is very important to enable not only young people, but you know, people of all walks and ages to orient and navigate in the overflux of, in the inflation of media and information. I would stress that it's important also to encourage specific groups, in particular young, to have their own media, either on school level, on local level, you know, because it's a unique, you know, practice, you know, also in civic education and in expression, you know, to be able to practice, to express themselves, because I think this is the most convincing learning tool, not just, you know, preaching and lecturing, but really, you know, giving them, you know, let's say paper and pen or camera and mic, you know. I think also peer learning is a very viable tool. So not only in schools, but also in our environments, other environments, we should, in this sense, you know, give the voice to the young people.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much. So I think you are the last one to join us on the panel. And then we'll bring the session to a close.
Okay. My name is Kayala Mamadova. I am from Azerbaijan. Actually, I would like to share my experience rather than making some questions, because almost most of the speakers and other participants share their question with all auditorium. Trust is really very sensitive word. When I realized it, when I start to work with entrepreneurs or just individual people from rural areas, which you already mentioned, vulnerable groups. Believe me, it was one of the task jobs that we had. They almost don't trust any institutions, anyone. When we approach with a project and involve them to the project, they were very, very skeptical. They said, oh, we don't trust what you will going to do us for us. Even our municipality are not so much interested for us. But you are now going to solve our problems. When I realized that, okay, already they are with some barriers in their mindset. If they do not trust anything, how they will going to be part of the project? So something should be done for them. And believe me, it is also somehow related with building empathy, because there were some rural areas which hasn't proper transport connection with city centers. They use very, very even ancient type of style, let's say horse riding, to come from the mountainous zone to the city center. And we start to work with them in order to education. I would like to mention in this phase education. The role of education is very important. When you educate them, for instance, one of the tools that we use, it's a financial literacy. Now we talk about taxation pension system. They are saying that why we should contribute taxation, which this budget expenses are not equally distributed, and we cannot get most of the time almost nothing sometimes. And we start to explain the system, how it works. We start to, at the individual level, to motivate them to make some actions, at least to make some changes. And even when we start to make exchange program with Italian partners, they even didn't believe that they can go and learn Italian experience. But after making all this, step by step, we check that they start to trust in you, like in not only me and also my team, because we after all this project, we collect all recommendations and submit this recommendation to the Minister of Economic Development in order to make better reforms in terms of better policy making related to rural areas. I think it is one of the good examples which government authorities use and also involving organizations, particularly to deal or at least to give some attention how to solve some group of vulnerable people in the society. And I think if individual level, we all of us, at least to make some action, even it can be small action, giving a hope to someone, we will achieve more better society and trustable society in our world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kasana. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, which actually shows quite clear that the trust is a process. Like it's big, it's complex, and so I think I will ask Ahmed to join us again on the panel, because we're working here together. And I give each of you a minute or so to basically wrap up and to give your, and I understand you need to run actually.
Yeah, I have a flight.
Exactly, so start. You have 1 minute.
No problem.
Ooh, 1 minute. Yeah, in my mind I'm already at the airport, but by concluding what I've just said is, thank you for sharing this experience. The trust is a process, and what I see from your example as well is that you really need to sometimes throw young people into the deep water. So I have experienced this a lot, that they are very passive, they don't believe in anything, they think that the world is against them. It's a teenager problem actually. But then you should tell them, okay, you try, here's the place, come on, let's see how can you do it. And if they get into that position, they start to feel that, okay, now I have responsibilities. Now they expect me to accomplish something like at a very high level. So really, engaging is not just about providing opportunities, it's also about challenging them.
Thank you. I wanted the red one. You made the right point, the other side of the rights are responsibilities. So basically, I really appreciated your case, because also through the processes we are talking about, through the engagement, participation, also we make people aware that they are owners of their own problems at a certain extent, you know. So they cannot expect, you know, to lay the solutions to other people, to blame, I don't know, their capitals, Brussels, whatever, Belgrade. And it's an important, you know, psychology process. We had such case, you know, during the largest influx of migrants through our country in 2015. Of course, it was a large shock to people and also to the communities on the border. And of course, you know, after the first shock, you know, people felt, I don't know, anger, fear, and so forth. So we were doing some workshops in closed, you know, kind of safe circles with the main, let's say, opinion leaders in the communes, with the school teachers, with headmasters, with the head of hospitals and so forth. And through a led process by an experienced moderator, you know, these people at certain functions in communes, but also others like teachers in kindergarten, they somehow, you know, in a soft way realized, you know, that this is the challenge they have to tackle at their own level, at their own function, and to play their own role. And you know, the major asset of these workshops, of this exercise, was not only that, but they somehow figured out how to work it out together. So,
thank you very much. Marcus, do you want to?
Very briefly, just to say that there's very strong agreement here in the panel. There's no magic bullet to restore trust. It's just a matter of changing the mindset of governments, more openness, more inclusion, more dialogue, and I think exactly what Sophia and Christina has mentioned. So I just wanted to thank Sophia, Christina, but especially Hanina and Ahmad for. It was a very, very interesting panel. We went all over the place, but I think we touched on the very important issues. So congratulations. I think you've done a great job.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I still want to add a word.
Yeah, and at last I would also want to thank our respected panelists for being with us here, and just to give a key message for you all, that like as a person, as part of our communities, we all have a role to play. And that is, we all should engage and earn trust and build trust and bridge the trust divide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Yeah, so I just would like to basically close this panel and remind us that actually trust is at the core of our social fabric and of the social contract. And that's why it's so important. And I believe we basically just scratched the surface with our panel today. We touched a bit base on the generational gap, on the delivering gap, on the information/participation gap, but it's so complex, and just like the interventions that came from the audience showed how many topics are actually related to that and basically how complex it is. So I just hope that you go back home with a lot of fresh ideas, and as Ahmed said, keep in mind that we all have a role to play and that you are double-headed. You're like citizens and institutions in the wider sense, so keep that in mind. Thank you very much. And thank you for the panelists for joining us today. Yeah.